edition of Ask the Rabbi. Next to me is the famous Rabbi Levi Friedman from Chabad of Coconut Grove. Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me again.
Yes, it's wonderful. You have a lot of views. A lot of people are enjoying your show.
It's your show.
Well,
You're the one who drives the
engine.
You drive the bus.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
So today's topic is going to be guilt and shame. A topic I think we can all understand and acknowledge. And yeah, so what does the Torah have to say about guilt and shame? And I'll chime in because I have some things also that I
feeling shameful and guilty about.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So this might be a surprise, but guilt has no place in Judaism. You know, you hear so many times from people about their guilt and their Jewish guilt or their religious guilt. But the truth is, guilt is something that has no place. There's no place for guilt. And the reason is because guilt is really not a productive feeling to have. Mm-hmm. So we've all experienced guilt, but let's maybe break it down and discuss it and see why guilt is not productive, it's not healthy, and why we really need to try and uproot guilt completely from our lives. But
so Jewish guilt is out.
It's a myth. It's not true.
Wow.
It's not a thing.
I wish I would have known that years ago. Okay.
Yeah, you would have parented differently, or
yeah, I would have lived my life a little differently. Okay.
Right. So what do we mean when we say guilt? So what do you think guilt means? When you wanted to talk about guilt today, what's the problem, first of all, with the guilt or feeling guilty, or is there no problem with feeling guilty?
Well, I used to teach in the prison.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to teach life skills, and one of these was guilt and shame. I used to teach it, so I have a better understanding psychologically about it.
Okay.
I do know that with guilt, I have this saying that I used to tell the inmates. Guilt, the definition of guilt is I did something wrong and I made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Shame is I am wrong, I am a mistake. Pretty powerful.
Right, absolutely. So okay, so
so that's what I know of it.
Okay, so guilt and shame are two different things, right? And to sum up, I guess what you said, guilt would be I feel bad about something I've done.
Yeah.
And shame is I feel bad about who I am.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So shame is about the way I define myself and the way I see myself, whereas guilt is the way I look at and evaluate my actions, right? My deeds.
Correct.
Okay, so let's deal with them one at a time, right? So guilt, now, if you do something wrong, what's wrong with feeling guilty, right? It seems like such a virtuous kind of a feeling, which is why I said it's a surprise that really there's no place for it in Jewish life and observance. You would think that if you are trying to live a more wholesome lifestyle, that your past misdeeds would be something that would be a source of guilt for you, right? Because it would mean that you recognize that what you did was wrong. Right. So somebody who lives, let's maybe look at the other way. The assumption would be that somebody who doesn't feel guilt just does whatever they please. Right. Mm-hmm. They just do what they want with no conscience and no sense of right or wrong. Right. It's all the same to them. Mm-hmm. But the truth is that that's not the case. The truth is that guilt, the problem with guilt is that it paralyzes us. Right. So there's this. Not this is not what we're going to talk about today, but there's a strong emphasis in Judaism on serving God with joy, and always being happy. And the reason for that is because joy, when we're happy, when we're feeling good about ourselves, we're more likely to be our best selves, right? Mm-hmm. So, for instance, something that my wife likes to mention a lot is that whenever somebody's acting out, it's because they're not feeling good about themselves. There's something internally that's bothering them, that's causing them to act out, right?
Oh,
so you don't.
Okay, say that again. That's very interesting. Say that again.
When somebody acts out,
correct,
it's because they don't feel good about themselves in whatever way, to whatever extent, whatever it is. When you're not feeling good about yourself, you're more likely to act out. Okay. Nobody that's in a good mood, that's feeling good about themselves, will go and harm somebody else. Mm-hmm. Right? Correct. It's when you're not feeling good about yourself that happens. So it's very important to, if you want to live a healthy life and a moral life, that you're feeling good about yourself. So the moment we start to feel bad, then we start to end up getting into trouble. So this feeling of guilt that we feel for past misdeeds, what that does is that brings us down. right?
Mhm.
Well, we'll get to shame maybe soon, but just even those feelings of guilt, they don't serve any productive function, right? So number one, they cause us to feel bad. And when you feel bad, you're more likely to do something wrong, right? So if I'm feeling bad about myself, I'm going to look for the easiest route to feeling better, right? To numb
Mhm.
that pain or to, right, to lessen that pain. And so where am I going to go? The path of least resistance, which is what, when you're feeling bad about yourself, another candy bar, right? That's
Oh,
another,
oh,
it's
yeah,
another,
okay.
another harmful and self-destructive activity
Behavior, yeah.
and behavior, right? So that's number one. Number two is that feeling guilty about something you've done, there's a role for feeling regret for things you've done, right? So I can identify things that I've done wrong,
Mhm.
and I can regret what I've done. So we'll talk maybe also a little bit about what regret means and what the role of regret is. But feeling guilty about it just means I think that I'm really just feeling bad about something that's been done without really appreciating what was actually wrong about what I did. So I just have this sort of superficial a label that I put on it. That was bad, and now I'm feeling bad, right? And so therefore, it doesn't even serve to make us to allow us to improve and to correct past misdeeds.
But how do you get rid of the guilt?
So how do you get rid of it? So the first thing is you have to identify it. You have to
Mhm.
identify it, and recognize that it's destructive, right? So how do you know that when you're feeling guilty that it has no place? So if you're feeling guilty, so first of all, if it comes out of the blue, right,
Mhm.
it comes
Mhm.
unannounced, suddenly you're feeling guilty about something,
But
right?
guilt
You're
is based
with,
upon an action that you've done, so it's not
correct.
gonna
Well,
come
we're
out of
talking
the
about
blue.
correct. We're talking
Okay.
no, but it's from your history, but that it comes up suddenly. I feel bad about what I said to my sister
Okay.
last week. Where'd that come from, right? And
Mhm.
what is that feeling trying to tell me? So now, the way to deal with past misdeeds so that we actually improve and we don't repeat the same mistakes is to set a time to think about things we've done, right? To take stock of our lives. Where have we been and where are we going, right? So it just as you go about your day, there's no room in your life to think about past failures. There's just no room for it. So anytime you have a thought like that, a guilty feeling about something that you've done in the past, you need to remove it from your mind.
Yeah, but you're assuming that people are just so, um, morally sound and perfect in every way, so they wouldn't feel guilt. I mean, you're talking about
No, we're talking about everyday, regular, ordinary people. When you feel bad about something you did, and we're not defining what's right and what's wrong. That we're not even. That's not our conversation.
mm,
However you define it, right? That's maybe another conversation. How we can define right and wrong, good and bad. But the point is, something that's causing you to feel guilty is something that you identify as bad, a behavior that you did that you shouldn't have done,
okay.
right? And there's a guilt that's associated. So feeling regret is one thing, but feeling guilty about it is quite another. And so
Oh, so if you change the word guilt to regret, that
that
shifts.
shift. So what do I mean by that?
Okay.
Right. So what happens? So you're
Yeah.
feeling guilty about something. The first thing is to change the subject in your mind. Don't think about it. Don't invite that thought in. Don't entertain it. And don't
Mhm.
feel. Don't allow that feeling to start to take root, because all that'll do is get you down. And when
Mhm.
you're down, you're more likely to repeat negative behavior. Right.
So how do you
So
rectify the guilt or
so how do you deal with
the
past
regret?
misdeeds? Should you
Yeah.
not feel guilty about anything? So no. So as I mentioned, the way to distract yourself or to deal with those feelings when they arrive and they arise is to say, okay, that what I did last week, that was really bad. That's
Mhm.
true,
Mhm.
but I'm busy. I'm shopping. I don't know. I'm at the dentist. I'm doing something else, and I'm going to focus on this, and I will deal with that later. When is later? Set a time, whenever it is. Tonight at 8 p.m. Tomorrow. In Hasidic teachings in the Tanya, he suggests that the time to do that is at night before you go to bed. At night before you go to bed, you think about your day. Think about how you behaved today and what you've done, where you've been, and so on. And so at night, that's sort of a proper time to sit down and reflect on your day.
Mhm.
And when you reflect, so that's number one. So
Mhm.
push all of that to a set time that you have. Now, what's interesting is that most of the time those feelings won't resurface when you show up at that time. So let's say you decided, at the end of the week or even at the end of the day, it's very nice. You're laying down in bed, you're about to go to sleep, and you want to reflect on your day. So it's not a bad thing to do if you're trying to grow. Um, And so you sit down to reflect, and suddenly those feelings are nowhere to be found. And the reason is because the reason you had those feelings during the day, those feelings of guilt, were only coming from your evil inclination, from that voice inside of you that's trying to get you to fall again, to trip and to stumble again, right? So when you're ready to be productive about it, proactive about it, suddenly it's hard to identify those misdeeds. But that's number one. Now, number two, when you inevitably are going to deal and grapple, let's say, with these past misdeeds, so what's the proper approach? So the truth is that we, as you know, if we've done something wrong, chances are that we don't fully have an appreciation for what was wrong about the act, right? There's a part of us maybe that is even desires to act out in that way, right? Now, so to say that I can make a moral sort of declaration and statement that what I did is morally unacceptable, morally wrong, is a little bit disingenuous. Not that it's not true, but it's a little insincere. In other words, I don't necessarily appreciate that it's wrong, right? And so what's going to prevent me? The fact that I've declared now that what I did yesterday was wrong, how is that going to prevent me from doing it again? So it's not really. So this is where we have to switch from guilt to regret. And what we have to do is think about what we've done and feel a regret. What does it mean to feel regret? To recognize the impact of our actions. So rather than to think about what it is that we did, right, and then sort of relive that experience again in our mind, which either will be exhilarating and exciting as it was when we did it, or will be demoralizing, right, and bring us down. Rather than do that, we focus on whom we harmed with that action, right? In other words, as I mentioned before about whether we did something, we feel guilty about something we did that was wrong. Well, what made it wrong? Why was that thing wrong? You did it. Do you really feel it's wrong? So the truth is, you might not feel it's wrong. You might think that it's very justifiable and it would be wonderful, and that's fine. But the reason that you're having an issue, the reason you're dealing with it now, is because it actually wronged somebody.
Correct.
Right? And so that's where that focus has to be. So past misdeeds, the way to deal with them healthy is not to just obsess over them, not to allow them to dominate our life, not to think about them whenever they come up and allow ourselves to feel guilty. Rather than doing that, set a time when you're going to think about these things, reflect on them, and then when you show up to that time, rather than think about the things that you've done, think about the people, right, that you harmed in that process. Right?
But
the consequence, the impact of your action.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It does. But back to my question is, how do you get rid of that? So, guilt is, I don't know, verb. Is that a verb? I have no idea.
That's a different show.
I missed that totally in high school and elementary school. But I find that with regret, there needs to be an action behind it for me. In other words, if I wronged somebody, in order to rectify that with that person and not feel the regret, I need to do something for that person that will take care of that situation.
Well, absolutely.
And not just, if you're sitting in your bed at nighttime and you're thinking about everything, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I feel as though an action needs to take place.
Well, 100%. That's exactly the beauty of it, right? Which is feeling guilty about something is not productive. What does that lead to? All it leads to is feeling bad about yourself, which will lead to more bad behavior, right? So and there's no way you can rectify when all you're thinking about is bad behavior. Thinking about bad behavior would just lead to more of it, right? And you just end up in that endless cycle. But when you think about the impact that your bad decision and choices had on somebody else, and you think about them, well, now there's room to change. Because first of all, now I'm less likely to repeat the same mistake, because this is not about I feel good, I feel bad, it was the right thing, it was the wrong thing. I'm all confused. I don't know whether it was right or wrong. I did it. So I don't really have such a great sense of right and wrong necessarily. And I have moments where I lapse in judgment, which is okay, right? But if I put the other person sort of in front of my eyes, and I'm mindful of the impact that it has on them, I'm less likely to repeat the act. And furthermore, I don't need to have any feelings of guilt, because once I identify who was harmed in this process, I now can take concrete steps to rectify that, right?
Which is
to make amends, which is the action. Absolutely. Right. So now Regret is actually very productive.
Okay.
And you spend more time on the healing rather than on the wound itself.
Okay. And now what about shame?
So what about shame?
Now, shame again is I am wrong. I made a mistake. No, sorry. Shame is I am a mistake, which
Right.
is very deep.
Yes. Well, all these run very deep.
Yeah.
But shame is
Harder to get rid of than regret.
it depends for whom, I guess. I
Well,
don't know. Everybody's
You
unique.
know, with
So-
when you talk about, sexual abuse or you abusing somebody, that's very shameful, and it's hard.
Right. So again, the idea is, we're looking to sort of live a better, happier, more productive lives, right? So the main question we always have to ask ourselves is where do we go from here, right? We're here now. Where do we go from here? And so, we talked a little bit about guilt, but talking about shame, we can't ever hope to rid ourselves of the ugliness that lurks inside, right? We all have desires, we all have impulses, and not all of them are very pure, right? That's a fact of life. And this feeling shame for the way we feel, or for our drives, our urges, or our desires, would mean to have a distorted view of our place in the world. Okay. So to put this, obviously, this doesn't have to be put. Maybe more important for this to be put sort of in a Jewish sort of context. Okay. God creates us. He creates us with a good inclination, creates us with an evil inclination. We have an inclination that is all about self-gratification and self-fulfillment. And for some people, now sometimes it's choices, we can train our evil inclination to get worse, but even the starting point is pretty bad, which is that it's all selfish, it's all about myself and whatever I find desirable, right? So that impulse is always there. And we're always battling with that impulse. So this impulse to just everything is for me and everything's about me, and I'm going to take whatever I desire, whatever I want at all costs. It doesn't matter the impact it has on anybody else. That selfish impulse is there. That's a drive we have. To deny that we have it, right, or to feel bad that we have it, would be to deny, the designer who designed us and created us. Now, why did God create us this way? So that's maybe a bigger conversation. But the point of it is that there's a certain pleasure that God gets in us battling those impulses and overcoming them, right? So in fact, interestingly, one of the 613 commandments in the Torah is not to follow your eyes and your heart astray, right? It's so that's a commandment. Who is that commandment directed to? Somebody whose heart and mind don't lead them astray, right? Obviously, it's to somebody who has sort of these internal impulses and drives that want to lead them into in the wrong direction. And overcoming them, we gain control and mastery over ourselves, and that's what it's all about.
So how do we get rid of the shame?
So the way we get rid of the shame is to recognize that whenever we encounter and come face to face with our inner ugliness, which is an element of us, and really not the true us, by the way. The true us are really beautiful. We're not ugly, and we're not shameful beings. We're creating the image of God. We're divine, we're godly, and we're beautiful. But there's an impulse, there's a drive inside of us that is ugly. And the idea is that ugly impulse is one that is there to be rejected, one that's there for us to resist. That's why we have it.
Okay.
And so it doesn't make us shameful when we grapple with it or when we encounter it. To the contrary, we should be happy that we are identifying that inner struggle and that we're mastering it.
So what actions can somebody take in regards to shame?
To meditate on what our role is here in the world,
why
we're here, and what we can do to contribute to the world exactly as we are.
And that'll just get rid of the shame? I don't know.
That'll be a start, a step in the right direction.
Yeah, along with therapy.
Well, yeah. Well, it depends how acute we're talking about. How deep? Yeah, absolutely. But this is not what we're talking about. Is not a substitute to for people that are suffering from intense psychological, emotional trauma that they need professional help with. We're talking about sort of really just theoretically and philosophically, even theologically, a little bit about these concepts and where they fit in the context of living a healthier life. But again, so that helps us get rid of the shame. Is that we have to transition from thinking of ourselves as that ugly impulse, recognize that ugly impulse is not the true us, right? It's a force within us that's there for us to resist. So when we need to define ourselves, rather than define ourselves, see ourselves as that one, we need to see ourselves as that pristine, godly soul that is created in the image of God.
And we look at shame and regret as lessons in life and how to correct them and refine ourselves. Couldn't that be looked upon as refinement?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you. That was it. Wow, that was fast,
Was that
Rabbi.
it? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Right? 20 minutes? Oh, we have 5 more minutes, don't we? Oh, let's keep going.
Okay, what do we want to talk about now?
I don't know. Let's talk about
Let's sing a song.
Let's see what it
Yeah, anything else you wanted to ask?
No. That's
So I'll tell you a story.
Okay,
I think I
good.
actually shared this last week in our Tuesday night class.
Okay.
No, it wasn't last week. I should remember when I shared this. I shared this on Friday, I think.
Okay.
About a chassid who was a businessman, and he would travel, around wherever. When he would come, he would don his traditional Hasidic garb, right?
Mhm.
The all black, right?
Yeah.
The whole thing. Like, we're always in black, right? And so he would don his traditional Hasidic garb. But then when he would head back out to business, he would dress like a businessman in a fine business suit, And one year he was thinking to himself, my master, my teacher, my Rebbe, he knows me thoroughly. I'm not fooling him by coming here and dressing up, in this Hasidic garb as if I'm some like pious rabbi who sits and studies all day. I'm not fooling him. So he decided that he's going to show up the next year he was coming back. He's going to show up the way he dresses the rest of the year, 364 other days of the year, just as a businessman. That's how he shows up. So he shows up, and the Rebbe takes a look at him and says to him, I thought whenever you'd come here and I'd see you dressed in your Hasidic garb, that was the real you. And the way you dressed during the year, when you're out there, that was sort of the costume. That was the persona that you took on when you were out in the world. But now I see you as the reverse, that you see yourself as the businessman in that persona, and that the Hasidic persona, right, this religious sort of lifestyle was one that you see as something external, something that that is a costume sort of that you put on, a mask that you wear, which is obviously a very profound lesson that Rebbe was telling him, which is, we have a choice to see ourselves in one of two ways, right? Shame comes from distorting our view of reality and our understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. Shame comes when we identify with that lowliness, that ugly impulse within us that's really just there for us to resist. But it's never a persona that we are supposed to assume and put on, right? And even when we sometimes, fall and even stumble and sometimes give in to those temptations, even then, the real me is never invested in that action. The real me never wanted to be part of that action, right? It just got dragged along. And so that's where we need to make that shift. When we're seeing shame, we can't let our worst days and these ugly temptations define who we are, right? We're much bigger, we're much better than that. And when we struggle with these impulses, we need to be happy, actually, not embarrassed, but we need to be happy that we are wrestling, that we're still in the fight, and that we haven't thrown in the towel, and that we're overcoming and resisting that ugliness. That's the real us. And I think if we can really shift the way we see ourselves and identify ourselves as that, as we started the conversation, that we're less likely to act out when we're feeling good about ourselves.
Right.
So when we say, when you're feeling good about yourself, and we don't mean in an egotistical kind of a way, you feel that's not a good sense of self. That's not a good feeling. We're talking about feeling you have a role, you have a purpose, right? Go about and identify with that, and you're more likely to gain that control and mastery over whatever's going on inside.
That's great. Oh, I love learning. Okay, great. Thank you, Rabbi, so much.
Thank you.
It was really great.
Thank you very much.
Good. All right. So thank you for joining us. Share this if you would, please. I'm sure there's somebody who would love to learn about regret. I'm going to use regret now, and
I
shame.
regret to tell you. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's
So have a wonderful day. Have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you so much. Bye
Take care.
bye.